If you've been watching this channel, then you know that I love horror. It is my favorite genre of literature, movies, and TV shows, but horror is also a genre that has a reputation for not always producing the highest quality of entertainment. It seems like for every good horror movie, we get a dozen soulless, low-budget Blumhouse movies with generic plots that exist just to barely make a profit or just to act as a tax write-off. So when a good horror movie or horror TV show comes around, it's something special, at least to me. And no one can make a better horror show than Mike Flanagan, who is my personal favorite director working today. Mike Flanagan is the genius behind 5 Netflix horror miniseries, those being The Haunting of Hill House, The Haunting of Bly Manor, Midnight Mass, The Midnight Club, and The Fall of the House of Usher. I love all of these shows. I've seen all of them multiple times, and I thought that it would be interesting for me to give you guys my personal ranking of each show from least favorite to favorite. But before we get into that, I need you all to know that I really do love all of these shows. Mike Flanagan does not miss. Each of them blend elements of horror and drama and are filled with emotion and depth that is sadly lacking in a lot of horror media. I would highly recommend that you watch all of these shows. They're seriously so amazing, and all of them are among my favorite TV shows ever, with my favorite Flanagan show actually being my favorite series of all time. One of the things that I love about these shows is that Mike Flanagan has a tendency to use the same actors in all of his shows. There will always be a couple newcomers as well, but he often recycles his cast, and it's so entertaining to see the phenomenal actors that he uses portray completely different roles from show to show. Something else that I love that I already mentioned is that Flanagan is excellent at adding heart and soul to all of his series. You learn to care for the characters, and it makes the stakes of like the paranormal occurrences that much more intense. Horror media often introduces a large cast of shallow characters to be used as fodder to be killed off over the course of the story, and Flanagan also uses a large cast of characters, but each of them are given so much charm and character, and you just come to grow attached to all of them. I'm going to put this out there as well. There are going to be some hot takes in this video. There were really only 2 placements on the list that I was absolutely certain of going into this video, those being the first one and the last one, but the other 3 shows were a complete toss-up for me. I will provide my personal reasoning for where I placed them, and if you disagree with that, then you can put that in the comments below. I will be discussing each of these shows from my least favorite to my favorite and giving my thoughts on each series as we discuss them. I will be talking mostly about the negatives first and then spend most of my time talking about why I love each of these shows. Please remember to like the video and subscribe if you haven't yet. I make videos about horror content, mostly horror literature, but I'm kind of branching out into some other things as well. I'm trying to make it to 10,000 subs by the end of April, which is definitely a stretch, but I think we can do it. But anyways, enough stalling. So starting with my least favorite and then going to my favorite, I'm going to rank and review every single Mike Flanagan Netflix show. Full spoilers ahead. There's no holds barred for this one. I recommend watching every single one of these shows, so please do that. And let's get into it. Number 5, The Midnight Club. I think this pick is probably the one that most of you would have expected if you've watched all these shows, and will probably be my least controversial take in this video. The Midnight Club is a good show, but it's like a 7.5 or like an 8 out of 10, whereas the other shows are like 9s and 10s out of 10 for me. But honestly, the biggest reason that the show is my least favorite of the bunch isn't even the fault of the show itself. This is the only Mike Flanagan show that was intended to run for longer than 1 season. It was supposed to have a 2nd season, but Netflix didn't renew the show, so we were left with a plot that was never fully resolved. I did not know that this was supposed to be multiple seasons going in, and I was very upset and confused when it ended, and I was even more upset when I learned that Netflix canceled season 2, and I suspect that's why Flanagan stopped making shows for them. Luckily, he would go on to give the full answers to all of the unresolved plot threads on Twitter, so it's not like we're left completely in the dark, but it still does hurt to think about. Some of the other negatives that I have for the show is that I felt that the general pacing and structure was a little off compared to the other shows on this list. I was very excited when it started because I figured it would be an anthology, and it kind of is. Each night, the patients at the teen hospice facility gather in the library and tell each other scary stories, and then we see those stories depicted using the same actors that portray the teens in the hospice house. I really like that idea, but one thing that I see as a huge missed opportunity is that I was expecting all of the stories to pertain to the personal lives of each person that was telling them. They kind of do this, but not every story is created equally. For me, the biggest missed opportunity is the story of the teenage serial killer, Dusty. It's fun to do a slasher story, but I was waiting for the reveal that Kevin, the kid who tells the story, was actually like a freaky psychopath, but that story didn't seem to relate to his own personal experiences at all. Compare that to what I think is probably one of the best stories, if not the best story, The Midnight Ride with Natsuki. In that story, we get to see the story play out of Natsuki going on this weird trippy ride with 2 strangers, only to realize that it's all in her head as she tries to end her own life. This reflects what actually happened in Natsuki's life, and it helps make the story that much more powerful. It also helps helps that Henry Thomas and Alex Esso show up, and they're always just a ton of fun to see on screen. The other story that I think is brilliant is the two Danas. Seeing the same girl live two parallel lives and then having each of them impact each other negatively is really interesting, and there's some really nasty like body horror in this film, which I always love to see. I think the strengths of this show are in its mysteries, especially the mystery being built up regarding Julia Jane and how she was able to defeat her cancer using the ritual that the kids try to perform. Having the Shasta character be revealed as Julia was kind of easy to see, but I like the twist. I love this theme and this through line that Julia thought she was unique and special due to her using this magic to get rid of her cancer, only for it to come back and for her to be obsessed with getting back inside the facility in order to repeat the ritual. She doesn't just recognize her own luck. Like all of these shows, the acting is phenomenal across the board. Ruth Codd is the obvious standout as Anya. She starts out being really rude and cold and eventually warms up to Ilanka, which is just a sweet thing to see happen, and it's very believable. The actor that blew me away though was Chris Sumter as Spencer. He is a teenager who has AIDS and was rejected by his mother due to him being gay, his homosexuality. He has a really sweet connection with Zach Gilford's character, who is the nurse practitioner who is also gay. There's a scene where Spencer returns home and delivers this incredibly powerful monologue to his mom about his sexuality and how he loves and embraces who he is as a person. I also love that this speech doesn't result in the immediate acceptance from his mother, but that she comes around slowly. It just feels more realistic that way. Another plot point that I thought was really funny was the character who is known for just lying all the time. She always tells these outlandish stories of her rich parents that never seem to come and visit her, and all of the other teens kind of know that she is lying, but they just humor her anyway. Only later, we find out that she's pretty much just been telling the truth the whole time. She gets Amesh an advanced copy of the PlayStation, which leads to a really sweet moment where they celebrate his birthday together. The only weird thing is that they sing Good Riddance by Green Day, and I'm pretty sure that that song would not have been out at the time that the show takes place in. It took me out of the show a bit, but maybe I'm just getting my facts and timeline wrong there. I also have to mention one of my favorite actors and probably the most underutilized actor currently working, and that is Robert Longstreet, who plays the janitor. He has a very sweet scene where he talks to Ilanka about death and moving on, and he just kills it like he always does. In the second season that never came out, he would have been revealed to have been the personification of death, only this time death is someone that's actually rather sweet and calming as opposed to how most of us think of death. But anyways, yeah, the show was really good. It just got shut down way too soon. Another one of the reasons that I didn't like this one as much is that I felt like Ilanka's story about the witches was a little dull, especially given that it was the last story that they tell in the season. But I also recognize that this show is seemingly written towards a teen audience, and I watched it for the first time when I was in my 20s and married, so I can see a younger audience really connecting with this one and enjoying this one a lot more than I do. Still though, it's an absolutely brilliant show that had so much potential, and I will forever be mad at Netflix for not giving Flanagan a second season, especially considering his track record and just all of the garbage that Netflix puts on their platform all the time. But anyways, I'm getting heated, so those are my thoughts on The Midnight Club, and now we have to move on to number 4, and I know this one is going to be the most controversial, so please just listen what I have to say. Let's do this thing. Number 4, The Haunting of Hill House. Please don't kill me. Okay, so I have to preface all of this by saying that I absolutely love this show. I think it's absolutely brilliant, and it's what introduced me to Mike Flanagan. I think it is also one of the most important horror shows ever created, and it set the standard for emotional, impactful horror series on Netflix. My biggest complaint with Hill House is one that I imagine wasn't even Flanagan's fault. It's like 2 episodes too long. I'm not saying that the ending is bad or anything, I'm just saying that the show is 10 episodes, and I think that things kind of start to drag on near like episode 6 or 7. The show doesn't carry a constant momentum, which is something that I think Flanagan nails with his other series. Beyond that, I think you can definitely tell that Flanagan wasn't fully confident coming into this series, and also I don't think that's his fault at all. It's totally natural. There's definitely a bigger focus on the horror elements of the show, which is brilliant, but I think it also distracts from the family drama, which is the heart of the show. The show is notable for including the hidden ghosts in the background, which I think is a really fun idea, but it kind of took me out of the show a little bit because I was constantly scanning the frame instead of listening to the characters. I knew this was becoming an issue for me when I watched the Two Storms episode for the first time. That episode is a complete masterpiece. It was all filmed in like 3 different shots, and the staging and choreography is absolutely insane, and it was so crazy to see when I watched behind the scenes footage for it. I mean, the fact that the funeral home set is actually physically connected to the Hill House interior set is just so clever. The revolving shot where all of the adult actors are replaced with the kids is absolutely brilliant and just completely heartbreaking. But I've watched this show multiple times, and I've watched reactions to this show many times. I know that a lot of people spend this episode being a little bit disappointed that they couldn't catch any hidden ghosts. it's just a little distracting. Another issue that I have is, again, one that is kind of unavoidable, and it's that the child actors just aren't on the same level as the adult actors. I don't blame the kids for this one bit, but some of the line delivery did take me out of the horror, and sometimes I wonder if it would have been better to have seen less of the kids or experienced their horror visually rather than having them say so many lines. But I think that's really it for the negatives. It's just a little slow, and also, like, the color grading on it makes it look kind of gross, but besides that, it's perfect. Each of the siblings are interesting in their own unique way. I know that a lot of people have a hard time with the adult kids because they can be so mean and insufferable, but that's the point, and they're all played really, really well. Each of them have their own faults, and you can understand why they don't have a good relationship with each other. The obvious favorite of the group is Luke. He is the one that almost everybody connects with, and it can be really frustrating to see how his siblings treat him, especially Steve. But we also have to remember that we haven't seen all of Luke's mistakes that he has made in the past. He was constantly stealing money, and he manipulates Nell into letting him shoot up in her car before he goes to rehab, which is really messed up. Nell is another fascinating character because everything about her is just so tragic. She needed help and was always reaching out, but she just became kind of a girl who cried wolf, which led to her tragic death. I just really love the way that she's handled in the show in general. Starting the show essentially with her death and then piecing everything together over the course of the next couple episodes is really compelling to me. Seeing her husband die tragically and then seeing her spiral into believing that he was killed by the bent neck lady was also just very haunting and creepy and sad. I love the scene where Theo comes over to stay with Nell and she forces her into touching the spot where her husband died, and Theo freaks out. It's pure desperation from Nell, but she does cross a boundary and the siblings don't really know how to properly communicate with each other. And the scene where we see her dancing with her husband at Hill House to the music, and then the immediate cut to her dancing by herself in the spooky cold house in silence, is an image that still haunts me to this day, and to me is probably the creepiest thing in the show. And of course, we have to talk about the brilliant reveal that Nell was the bent neck lady the entire time. It's just so unbelievably sad. She was haunted her entire life by her own dying corpse, and the scene where she is pushed to death by her own mother and then drops into all of the scenes that we have seen the bent neck lady in so far is just pure perfection. Speaking of the mother, Olivia is an endlessly fascinating character to me. Getting to see her spiral into madness due to this house is terrifying and soul-crushing. Murdy KK is one of my favorite YouTubers on this platform, and she has a video all about this series that you all should watch. She posits that the Olivia that we see is actually from the point of view of the kids and Hugh. She's presented as this beautiful, well-spoken, perfectly groomed woman who always knows what to do up until the house starts to get to her. But she also guesses that the reality might have been more complicated. Maybe she had her own demons all along, and that's why her sudden turn in Hill House was seen as believable by Steve. And speaking of Steve, let's talk about him now. Steve is fascinating because he has so many negative traits, and I'm pretty sure that the show wants you to hate him. He's rude, dismissive, and he always thinks he knows best. He has a lot of money and loves to flaunt that fact, and he used the trauma of the family's shared past to write a best-selling novel. He refuses to see the haunting as anything other than the mental illness, which is very frustrating for the viewer since we know what actually really happened. We learned that all of this was just kind of a shield that he used to protect himself from the unknown, and that is the journey that he goes on. I think one of the aspects of the story that goes a little too far with Steve is his vasectomy. Like, taking your wife to fertility treatments when you know that you can't even have a kid is just diabolical, and honestly, I'm shocked that his wife takes him back in the end. I get that he thinks his family is sick and kind of cursed and he doesn't want to pass any of that on, but it just seems a little too evil to me. Maybe I'm missing something though, so if you love Steve, then please let me know. I also really enjoy Hugh as a character. He's played perfectly by both of his actors, and the older Hugh is constant, like, shell shock at seeing his kids again is brilliant. He seems like a well-meaning guy that just wasn't able to truly see what was going on with his wife. The fact that he essentially bears the weight of what Olivia and the house did is really brutal as well. He ruined his relationship with all of his kids in order to keep the truth of what their mother did from them and the rest of the world. And I'm not saying that's like perfectly what he should have done. I don't think he makes all the correct decisions all the time, but it is interesting to see him kind of carry that weight with him and not be able to really express it to his kids properly. I love Henry Thomas's performance as he takes the kids out of Hill House at the beginning of the show. He tries to remain calm, but he lets them know that something very serious is happening. I'm sure that he could have been a little more upfront with what actually happened, but he didn't quite understand it either. Shirley is probably the other character that is least liked by the fans, and I get it. I think her actress is brilliant, and I love that she is someone who prides herself on fixing everything and does everything right and is unable to come to terms with the fact that she makes mistakes. I think this attitude is an extension of how the kids saw Olivia. She was a perfect woman who was taken from them too soon, so Shirley tries to live up to the memory of her mother, but she doesn't really have the full picture of what her mother was actually like. She's the only member of the family to have kids of her own and struggles with trying to move past the troubles of her family, but she's also unable to keep away from them. She has Theo living in her guest house, and she wants to be the one to do Nell's funeral so that she can bring the family back to her house. Obviously, the most troubling aspect of her character is her absolute fury towards her husband, who seemingly cheats on her with Theo. I actually think that if I were in her situation, that I would also be very mad. Even if Theo does have an explanation for it, it still looks bad and would be very upsetting. But then we learn that Shirley already had a full-blown affair, which just makes her a hypocrite. We're supposed to connect the dots and then realize that her anger towards her husband is really her self-hatred bubbling up, and I do like that she confesses to her husband in the end, but man, it's infuriating to watch in such a great way. Theo is probably the most iconic of the older siblings, but I also think she's kind of the least interesting to me personally. Her psychic powers are cool, and I like that it's never really explained, but her arc of just like learning to trust people and moving in with her girlfriend of like 2 weeks is like a little odd and kind of rushed. I do really love that she's named after the character of the same name in the original Shirley Jackson novel, who is heavily hinted at being a lesbian in that story. Flanagan is always great at representation, and it's definitely appropriate to have it in a Shirley Jackson adaptation. And I have to point out Robert Longstreet yet again, just giving an absolutely amazing performance as Mr. Dudley. His monologue about his wife losing her baby and then hearing her cry at Hill House is just amazing, and I was blown away the first time I heard it. Like, it just goes on for so long and you keep waiting for a cut, but he just nails it. It's insane, just brilliant. But at the end of the day, Hill House is just kind of a simple story in a really good way. It's a story about a broken family and the ghosts that haunt them. It achieves everything that it's going for and so much more. I think it's fair to say that it's Flanagan's most popular show. It started a series of 5 shows that are all incredible, and I just have so much respect for it. I really love the ending as well. I know that originally Flanagan wanted the ending to have a twist, that they never made it out of the Red Room, but I'm glad that they went for the happy ending. And of course, playing Gregory Alan Isakov, who's right behind me, right there. It's just playing him at the end is brilliant. I love that song so much, and it just puts such a nice bow on the story. So yeah, the show is phenomenal. Like I said, I think this is a controversial placement for it, but I do really think it's like almost perfect. I just happen to like the next 3 a little bit more. Number 3, The Haunting of Bly Manor. This one just barely edges out Hill House for me, but I know that's an unpopular opinion. Bly Manor is a show that catches a lot of people off guard and tends to disappoint a lot of viewers who are going in expecting season 2 of Hill House. I almost wish that the show didn't use the Haunting of title because it is so different from Hill House, and it's much more of a love story than a scary story. Speaking of that, my biggest gripe with the show is just the on-the-nose explanation of the story being a love story. It's really like the only line of the show that I don't like. And when I say that, I'm talking about when Flora explains that to Danny at the very end of the story. It's just really on the nose. There's another part of the dialogue that's on the nose as well. Those are just my least favorite parts of the show. It's not that big of a deal. It's just, it bothers me for some reason. So yeah, the other on-the-nose part that I don't like is when Danny tells Jamie about her being a moonflower. I think it's just something that we could have picked up without her saying it directly. But then all of the other reasons why this show isn't up higher on the list has nothing to do with what Bly Manor does wrong, because I think it does almost everything right. Like I said, the other 2 shows I just like a little bit more. But oh my goodness, is this show absolutely phenomenal. It sets up so many intriguing mysteries, and I honestly didn't have a clue as to where it was going until it got there. This show made the genius choice to recycle cast members from Hill House, and it's amazing. Seeing Nell's actress, Victoria Pedretti, or Pedretti, I don't know how you say that, but seeing her take the lead as Danny is just wonderful. She plays this like anxious, well-meaning girl very well, and you believe all of the emotion that she feels throughout the show. I love her confidence at the beginning as well when she confronts Uncle Henry at the bar. Having Luke come back as one of the main antagonists was also a brilliant choice as well, because returning viewers from Hill House would already have built-in sympathy for him, only to find out that he's kind of a terrible douche who tricks a girl into killing herself for him. I love how Peter Quint is built up to be this terrible person, and you might be expecting some dramatic death for him, and he does die dramatically, but I love that it was just by random chance. The scene where the lady in the lake kills him is amazing because she's been teased as a threat, but seeing her in action is something else and just makes her that much more scary and threatening. I also love the scene where the kids are playing hide and seek with Danny and Flora shushes the faceless ghost. The scene really feels like it's about to introduce another big horror element, but then gives you something completely different with Flora knowing about the ghosts and not being bothered by them. It's just a great way for the series to tell you that this is going to be something a little bit different and more complicated than maybe you're expecting. We also have to talk about Owen and Hannah, who are incredibly cute together and have kind of a school kid romance with each other that's just very sweet to see develop. Of course, we end up learning that Hannah has been dead the whole time, which is brutal and so sad, and it just captures the themes of the story so well. This is a show about wanting to be with someone, but something is preventing that from happening. We have Owen and Hannah being apart due to Hannah's death. We have a similar situation with Peter and Rebecca. We have Uncle Henry that wants to be with his brother's wife, but she doesn't want that. We also have another core aspect of the story, which is Danny's relationship with her fiance. His ghost is teased so well. The freaky glowing glasses are just such a great design for a ghost, and I love that she almost always sees him in the reflection. It's just a good way to set up a mystery. Then learning that they were engaged due to being kind of childhood sweethearts is an interesting angle as well. You think that something tragic is going to happen to him, which it obviously does, but I love that the issue of the relationship is Danny coming to terms with her own sexuality. This show takes place in the 80s, so homosexuality was unfortunately less socially acceptable in those days. What's great about the show is that when you watch it for the first time, it's really easy to understand where Danny is coming from and why she might love her fiance as a friend, but has to come with terms with who she is as a person. The fiance's death scene is also really well done. The argument leading to him getting out of the car and then being hit is brilliant, especially just that one shot of the light in his glasses just before he's hit that puts the final piece together of what the ghost really is. I love how Danny's journey is just learning to accept this loss and understanding that it wasn't her fault. I like how we don't even see her final conversation with the apparition. We know that she has learned to accept herself and isn't afraid anymore, and now the ghost just serves no purpose to her. I also love the reveal that the mysterious phone calls going to the house have been coming from the uncle who has been trying to hear Flora's voice since he's her real father. That part of the show is sad as well because the uncle seems to have completely shut himself off from them in order to respect his brother's wishes, but the kids do need a parental figure in their lives. I have to talk about the amazing flashback episode as well, where we learn the history of Bly Manor and who the Lady of the Lake is. It's such a wonderful old ghost story, and it brings to light the fact that the whole show is just kind of this gothic horror romance. The ghost is the embodiment of sorrow and rage, and that is just so much more interesting than it just being a basic evil spirit. And then having Danny form this psychic connection melding of the two by doing the same thing that Peter does with the kids in order to save Flora is really interesting and a great way to resolve that plot point. Her being able to live out a life with Jamie but always being worried of the Lady in the Lake coming back is adorable and also tragic. Her final decision to sacrifice herself is really noble and heartbreaking, and it makes me tear up a little every single time. And of course, I love the reveal that the storyteller is Jamie and that the bride is Flora. Seeing that all of the adults kind of stayed in contact with the kids after they were taken to America by their uncle is very heartwarming, and that Sheryl Crow song at the end is really just sad and perfect. One scene that I really love that I think is kind of easy to overlook is the scene with Peter where he is tucked away in the memory of his mother. Peter has been portrayed as just this evil kind of sales bro douchebag with no redeeming characteristics, and I don't think his past redeems him, but it does give him another dimension. Understanding that he is the victim of his own childhood abuse and that his mother covered it up is really horrifying and heartbreaking. The fact that she seems to blame Peter for the current condition of his abusive father is also really messed up. Peter is the worst, but he didn't deserve that. Nobody deserves that. And the final line delivered by his mother where she tells him that she doesn't even know that he's dead is really sad to me as well. Just the fact that this entire story seems so important, but Peter's own mom doesn't even care enough to check on him is heartbreaking. But I could gush about the show all day long, honestly, but I have to leave room for the other shows on this list as well. Again, this just barely edges out Hill House for me, and it's only because I think I personally connected with the story of Bly Manor a little bit more. I personally don't come from a dysfunctional family, and I don't have kids, so the Hill House story is a little bit harder for me to connect with, but I have experienced heartbreak before and some loss in my life, so I think the story of Bly Manor just tugs at my heartstrings a little bit more, and then seeing Danny's hand on Jamie's shoulder at the end of the story always makes me cry. But anyways, let's get into my second favorite show, which means you guys will also know my favorite show, but trust me, you'll want to hear me talk about both of them because I could fill an entire 2-hour-long video with each of these shows easily. Let's get into it. Number 2, The Fall of the House of Usher. I think this one might be a little shocking to some people. I feel that this one kind of flew under the radar a bit, but I loved every second of it. As soon as I heard that Flanagan was adapting a bunch of Edgar Allan Poe stories, I was locked in. My negatives for this show are honestly non-existent. I think my only minor gripe is that I feel that Napoleon's relationship with his fiance feels very surface level, but I also think that that's kind of the point. He's supposed to be a tool, and the actor portrays that perfectly. Oh, and also Roderick and Madeline's mother is a little on the nose when she talks about God and then how Longfellow was like God to her. I get what they were going for, but the writing just felt a tiny bit clunky there. Besides that, this show is perfect. The score is brilliant, the opening is electrifying, the framing device is amazing, and all of the characters are interesting and unique. I have to give a massive shout out to Carl Lumley, who plays the older Augustus Dupin. He is my favorite part of the entire show. This show is different from most of Mike Flanagan's work because it doesn't really have a ton of moments that tug at your heartstrings. There's really only kind of one moment like that near the end, but it makes all the deaths so much more satisfying, and the show is also his funniest in my opinion. The framing device is also a ton of fun with the older Roderick confessing to Augie. Roderick is just a terrible person who is so smug even when confessing to everything bad that he has ever done. He always has like somebody else to blame or some reason for what he did, and it's always just complete garbage. I love in the first episode where Roderick tells Augie that the ghost of his mother is behind him, and you can actually just barely see her standing there, but Augie doesn't move and he stands his ground thinking that Roderick is just playing mind games with him. And of course, the moment where Roderick gets mad at the ghost of one of his kids for interrupting him, and Augie yells at him and tells them that he will knock his lights out if he raises his voice at him again. It's so intense and just delivered absolutely perfectly. I do want to do a mini ranking in this video of all the deaths of the Usher children in the show because I think that would be kind of fun, and it also give me a fun way to talk about every character and how they died. So starting with my least favorite death, it's probably Napoleon, who falls off his balcony while chasing the ghost cat. I think that his story is really fun, and I love his obsession with getting to the cat. Edgar Allan Poe often wrote about obsession, so it's very apt that it's portrayed in the way that it is. Napoleon, of all the Ushers, seems to be the most well-meaning. He's still unfaithful to his fiancée and kind of a tool who takes credit for other people's works, but he does seem to genuinely care for his siblings, especially Prospero, who it seems like nobody else in the family likes. So I do think it's fitting that his death is probably the least painful of the bunch, at least of the Usher siblings. He falls to his death, and we do get to see and hear the very heavy, dull thud that he makes as he lands on the concrete, which is just brutal. I think most people, like myself, thought he would land on the car, but he doesn't, and it just makes it so much more real. Next up, we have Camille's death by monkey. This one loses a point for me because we don't really get to see it happen at all. We just know that she is torn apart by a chimp, and that in and of itself is really brutal. I love how she goes in to find out what's going on with her sister, and then the security guard, Verna, who we'll talk about in a bit, just repeatedly asks her to go home. She has no issue calling Camille out for how mean she is, and I love seeing Camille just be so shocked that somebody is finally standing up to her. She also seems to be the only one of the Usher kids that fully accepts her fate before she dies, taking a picture of the chimp only to be killed by it. It's a fun death, but it's not quite as impactful as the others. She is just a really great character though. Her being this manipulative publicist is a cool angle, and I love the scene of her watching the Bill's YouTube channel where she's kind of doing the punches. It's just funny that she seems to be into what he's doing but doesn't want anybody to know. Then we also find out that she's a weird pervy boss, which is a bit of a surprise. I also love the scene where she freaks out at her assistants because they don't want to do any of the weird sex stuff with her, and she just like completely freaks out and throws what's essentially a child's temper tantrum. Kate Siegel nails her roles in every single one of these shows, but I was just shocked at how funny she was in Usher. The next death in my ranking is Victorine's Telltale Heart death. I really like the freaky image of her girlfriend's chest cut open with the heart sleeve on it. I think it's just a really clever way to use the Telltale Heart story, and I think it did the source material justice. She is definitely the one that snuck up on me the most when it came to revealing that she was a terrible person as well. At first, she seems so nice and like she just wants this heart mesh to really work, but then having her accept Verna as a human test subject while knowing that it wouldn't work and just kill her is just so messed up and evil. Then we have her killing her girlfriend, which is brutal and just makes her mind completely snap. They tease the death at first before showing us the whole thing later, and I don't know if anybody thought anything other than Victorine killed her girlfriend, so I don't know if the tease was really necessary. But then having her completely lose it at the end when Roderick is at her house is really fun to watch. At this point, Roderick is seemingly trying to keep his eye on his kids to keep them safe, but he is unable to do anything when she stabs herself. I think that is the moment that Roderick realizes that something serious is going on. He's also able to see that he essentially kind of pushed Victorine into this by being so demanding and not being an emotionally available father. I mean, this is also before we learn that he literally sold the souls of all of his kids away. Next we have Tamerlane, who I am tempted to put in the second spot, but I think her death is just a little less cool than the next two. Her complete breakdown is pretty satisfying to watch, although it does get a little sad at the end. She's just such a terrible person. She seems to force Bill into sleeping with sex workers when he doesn't want that, and then gets mad at him when she suspects that he's seeing Verna on the side. He tries to explain to her that she's losing it and she just won't have any of it. Her treatment of Juno is also terrible. At one point she literally says, "Why is it talking?" right in front of her, and that's just so mean and petty and cruel. Like, I can understand not liking that your dad married a very young woman, but you shouldn't take it out on his new wife. Her death scene is really great. The fact that she sees Verna in the mirrors teasing her for being so cruel is very similar to Camille's death, but it feels just a little bit sadder with Tamerlane's. She seems to realize by the end that she is the one who kind of messed everything up, but she can't really do anything to fix it at this point. Having her smash all the mirrors and then do that jumping mirror smash and then be stabbed from the shards falling down on her as well as the ones on the bed already is absolutely brutal. Of all the deaths, this is definitely one that I can feel the most when I watch it. Samantha Sloyan is just a fantastic actress, and she makes all of her roles feel believable. She is amazing as Tamerlane, is able to come off as so cold and petty, and it's just really off-putting in the best kind of way. I do feel bad for her husband though. He seems like a well-meaning guy. For my second favorite death, I have Prospero, who gets melted by acid at a midnight orgy. If that sounds completely insane, it's because it is, but it's also incredible. This was another one that I saw coming from the time that we saw the first drip of the acid onto the phone. Perry is an interesting character because he's the first of the siblings to die, and we don't know a ton about him other than the fact that he seems kind of like a spoiled, crazy tool with absolutely zero impulse control. He is perfectly hateable, but he's also pretty young, so there's some sympathy or grace given there. That is, at least for me, until he invites his sister-in-law to his weird sex party and seemingly wants to sleep with her, film it, and then blackmail Frederick for it. That is seriously messed up, and it's wild that Morel shows up to the party at all in the end. The reveal that his entire goal with the party is to blackmail a bunch of people is a nice touch that just makes him feel that much more unlikable before he dies. I also like when he is talking to Verna in the Red Room. He just seems so kind of childish and out of his depth and kind of has a lot of misplaced confidence, and she seems to just kind of run circles around him in the conversation. The actual death scene is completely brutal and just the perfect way to start off the show when it comes to the death of the siblings. Seeing everyone be melted down and unable to do anything is absolutely brutal, but what's worse is what happens after the rain stops. I love how the music cuts out and the bursting of the light fixtures gives us a quick glimpse at what has become just this writhing mass of melted flesh that you can hear kind of sputtering and groaning. It's so gross and so well done, and it's just such a haunting image. And then to up the gross factor, they have Verna kiss his acid melted face and then place the mask of the Red Death on him, which is just a great image. Going into the show, I was most excited for how they adapted that particular short story, and I think it was done justice. I think it's really cool what they did with it. So yeah, just a brutal, stylish, horrifying death that sets up the mystery of who Verna is. Her warning the security guards and Morel before the massacre is a nice touch that adds an element of morality to her mostly indifferent actions towards the family. And then for my favorite death, we have Freddy, the man sliced in half slowly by a pendulum while being completely paralyzed but still able to feel everything. It is the perfect way for him to go out after seeing the monster that he truly is. When the show first started, my wife and I wondered if each of the children were being killed in order of how guilty they were, or just kind of how bad they were as people. It seemed like Frederick was kind of a tool, and he spent his days propping up a company that willingly got people addicted to a drug that they marketed as not addictive, and that besides that he might have been not a terrible guy, but that is not the case. Frederick is the absolute worst person in the show in my opinion. Maybe Roderick edges him out a little bit due to his pure cynicism, but seeing what Freddy does to Morel is horrifying. Keeping her paralyzed and then ripping out all of her teeth, it's just absolute torture and horrible. I love how the seeds of his insanity are planted at the beginning of the show, and then we get to see him kind of fall deeper and deeper into paranoia and addiction. He takes the drugs from Napoleon in the third episode, then has to come to terms with the fact that his wife was at the infamous midnight acid orgy. That would be a very tough pill to swallow for sure. Obviously something tragic has happened to his wife, but then the context of that tragedy is also really upsetting and weird. And then add on to the whole thing that Roderick blames Freddy for his wife nearly dying, and you just have this ticking time bomb. And the costume and makeup for Morel is just brilliant. Her bandages get more yellow and bloody, and then she starts to look really gross, and you can tell that she's just not being taken care of at all. And then when he starts to paralyze her, you just have no choice but to hate Freddy with everything that you have. And then the final nail in the coffin are the pliers. Ripping out her teeth would be so unbelievably painful for her, and he acts like he's doing this in like an act of restitution. And then of course everything that I'm saying now is echoed by Verna right before Freddy dies. I love that she uses the opportunity to admit that she could have killed him in any way that she wanted, but decided to make it as painful as possible due to what he did to his wife. Seeing her like calmly lay next to him and then hit him with the "I'm a head out" is just cool and funny and just awesome. And Henry Thomas is just brilliant the entire time. He's so unlikable and just feels so small in this role, which is crazy because he plays the exact opposite of that in Hill House and then the next show we're going to talk about. His face as he is sliced in half is perfect, and it sells the insane amount of pain that Frederick is in without being able to move a muscle. But now that we've covered the deaths, I want to highlight some of the other characters that are amazing as well. Both Roderick and Madeline are wonderful to watch in all three of their distinct appearances across the three time periods. Zach Gilford sells the idea that Roderick isn't as bad as he seems really well up until the scene where he betrays Augie. His turn into a full villain is really sad, especially considering what ends up happening to Annabelle Lee. And Bruce Greenwood was not originally supposed to play the older Roderick. It was supposed to be another actor, but apparently he was being like a creep and just difficult to work with on set, so they had to replace him. I can't imagine Roderick being anybody other than Bruce Greenwood, though. He nails the role. He has the perfect voice for it and manages to seem so powerful, but also so small at the same time. His moment where he yells at people feels like him kind of lashing out rather than having any actual authority to it, which is perfect considering that everything he has was given to him by an otherworldly presence. Madeline is also amazing, just so calculating the entire time. I love how she tries to get Roderick to off himself so she can take control of the company. Even in the face of her brother dying, her twin brother, she's still just trying to get ahead. The only time we ever see the mask slip with her is when she's told by Annabelle Lee that she is so small. We think that this doesn't really bother her, but then when both her and Roderick kill Griswold by burying him alive, which is absolutely brutal, by the way, she places the brick with "You are so small" written on it, almost like she is allowing the one thing that has ever gotten to her to be buried with the rest of her old life. I also love the reveal that the freaky jester that gives us the two amazing jump scares in the show is actually Griswold. He is also very unlikable and definitely feels like he's compensating for something, if you know what I mean. To see him get buried alive is insane, but it's fitting for an act that Roderick and Madeline would be so careful to take to their graves. Griswold, the guy that plays him, also plays a character in Midnight Mass, and I didn't recognize him for the longest time. He's like two completely different people. Another fantastic actor that I don't see in a lot of stuff. And then Roderick and Madeline's deaths are also really good. Being told that they have to go out of the world together, then having Roderick poison her and then essentially like gut her and take her eyes out, only for her to be alive still and then pop out of the basement and choke him to death is great, mirroring how their mom killed Longfellow. These are two people that excelled at everything in life by sticking together and screwing over every single person below them, including their own family. And the fact that they die in a crumbling house while one is trying to kill the other after being horribly disfigured is just fitting for them. I also have to address Mark Hamill, who was amazing as Arthur Pym. He isn't in the show a whole ton, but he is convincing as this creepy lawyer that gets the family out of every possible problem they get themselves into. I love seeing Mark Hamill in live action stuff, and this role was just perfect for him. Kylie Curran as Lenore is also really fantastic. She kind of spends most of the show in the background and seems like a great kid, and that's because she is. She's the only one to question if the family is really doing the right thing or if they're doing something wrong by getting people addicted to this drug, and she seems to understand that no amount of money can make what they are doing right. Her standing up to Pym is really great as well, and the actress just absolutely kills that line. Then seeing her try to convince Roderick that his money is no good is great, even though it seems like he's not really picking up a word that she says. Her death is also really heartbreaking. After finding out that Roderick sold his entire bloodline out, I was really hoping that Morel cheated on Frederick and that Lenore wasn't really his daughter. But then when she walks in the room and you see Verna, you know exactly what is going to happen, but it still just hurts so much. And I love that Verna explains to her all the good things that she's going to do, and she gives her a painless death. It's a cool dimension to Verna's character. Ruth Codd kills it as Juno as well. She's really great in the Midnight Club, and she's just such a funny character in the show. She adds so much humor to it. She kind of seems like a gold digger at first, but you find out that she really does mean well and just really hasn't experienced a genuine connection in a really long time. The fact that she inherits Roderick's entire estate and puts it to good use is really heartwarming and a great end for her character that was well deserved. But now we got to talk about Carla Gugino as Verna because she's the absolute star of this show for me. She's so mysterious and cool and always talks like she knows exactly what's going on. She doesn't place a single step wrong and is just a wonderful depiction of fate and death. The only time that she seems a little shocked is when she hears how fast Roderick sells out his entire family to her. She's just absolutely brilliant and manages to sell every single one of the characters that she plays in the show really well. Seeing her kind of pop up as some kind of omen of death is really fun, and I love every second that she's on screen. But yeah, I've probably ranted about Usher for way too long now. I've got to give some time to my favorite Mike Flanagan show and my own personal favorite show of all time. Number 1, Midnight Mass. I think the show is literally perfect. There is a single line read that I don't love, but that's it, and I won't tell you which one it is either because for all intents and purposes, this show is perfect. The acting is just phenomenal across the board. Hamish Linklater as Pruitt is one of the greatest acting performances that I've ever seen in my entire life, and I am shocked that he isn't in more popular movies and shows because he is phenomenal. He always feels like a little nervous and not quite sure of himself, which is perfect because he's an old man in a young man's body. His convictions in the end are also really brilliant. I love the part where he's crying when he's talking to Mildred, and he's kind of like, the way he cries is very realistic, and like his voice gets all high. It's just such a vulnerable portrayal of this character you think is going to be a lot like scarier than he really is. My absolute favorite line of his is when he's talking to Bev and he says, "That's the thing about the priesthood, it's not supposed to be about me, it's supposed to be about God." It's just so brilliant and just like, he puts so much force behind that God. It's brilliant. I love it. He sells every second of his performance and manages to seem like both menacing and friendly at the same time. He's a character that I could talk about forever, and I honestly might make a full video about Midnight Mass someday just because I love it so much. Zach Gilford as Riley Flynn is also incredible. He's such an interesting character because he seems like such a nice, well-meaning guy, but literally the first thing that we see him do and the first thing that we see in the show is him kill a woman due to driving while drunk. His journey is really interesting as he kind of struggles to find out who he is and what he believes. I could go on forever about all of the phenomenal actors, but I do have to give a shout out to 2 more in particular. Samantha Sloyan as Bev is the most hateable character I've ever seen, and it's absolutely brilliant. She's so pompous and entitled and snarky and judgmental and just embodies everything that the show is trying to warn the viewer against. Her death is also so satisfying. Seeing her try to bury herself in the sand because she can't accept death and knows that she's going to be judged is just brilliant and chef's kiss. And I have to mention my man Robert Longstreet as Joe Colley because he knocks it out of the park. The scene where Lisa confronts him in his trailer is just acted perfectly by the two of them, and his crying just feels so believable. The fact that he dies so unfairly is brutal and just kind of fitting for the show. I also love that the main threat of this show is just a vampire. Like, they never call it a vampire, but that's what it is. They don't have to explain what it can and can't do because we already know what a vampire is, and I think that's brilliant. I mean, the fact that the show starts as the story of a man coming back to his small town and ends with a bunch of vampires killing and eating people while burning down the entire island is absolutely insane, and I love it so much. I remember getting to like the last couple episodes and like looking at my wife and being like, what are we watching? This is so different than I expected, but it's just amazing. Despite all the death and destruction and carnage, the show just feels so cozy to me. It just feels like autumn, and I also feel like it's Flanagan at his most confident. This show isn't concerned with scaring the viewer as much as his other shows are. It's more concerned with the characters and getting you invested in them, and I think that the characters are all just written brilliantly. Although an interesting fact about the show is that Mike Flanagan said that to him, the scariest possible thing he could imagine is killing somebody in a drunk driving accident because he said he used to have some issues with alcohol. So the show does start with what he considers like the scariest thing that could happen to somebody. Another thing that I love in the show is that you can tell at the beginning the actors have all been aged up with makeup, and I was a little like kind of like weirded out by it at first. I wonder why they didn't just kind of cast older actors, but then seeing them all get younger and younger, it all starts to make sense. The central mystery of the show is just what is up with Father Paul. Obviously, there's also the mystery of like the vampire, but that doesn't really come until later. But Paul is just so interesting. He heals Lisa and seems to be a well-meaning guy, but there's obviously something sinister going on. I think most viewers would probably just assume that he killed Pruitt. That's what I thought at first, certainly. But then it's revealed just a couple episodes in that he is Pruitt and that he just kind of wants to help the island. I mean, at least that's what he wants us to think that he's doing, but then we get the final piece and learn that he is Sarah's father and just wanted to be able to live that life that he never got to live with Mildred. I also love how Mildred just tells him that they made their decisions and that they have to live with that. She doesn't really have any interest in going back in time to change things. The ending of the show is just also perfect. The fact that we get all of the villagers accepting their deaths as they sing Nearer My God to Thee is so fitting, and whenever I see the sheriff's son praying with his dad at the end, I start to tear up. I also really appreciate that the message of the show isn't just that like religion is bad, but rather that using religion as an excuse to judge and shun others is wrong and kind of missing the point of the whole thing. Riley's parents don't have to abandon their faith in the end, and they're kind of the ones that lead the hymn that take them all to their grave. I think it would have been really easy to make a show that just talks about kind of how organized religion is a bad thing for people, but the show does a lot more interesting things with that, and I think it's really fitting and respectable, especially coming from somebody like Mike Flanagan who grew up Catholic but isn't religious anymore. I also love the choice to kill Riley off with 2 episodes left to go. He is definitely kind of presented as the main character, and then to see him be led off into the afterlife by the woman that he killed and then turning into a burning skeleton is just so cool and eerie and amazing. So yeah, Midnight Mass is the perfect show. There is nothing wrong with it, and I have no issue calling it my favorite show of all time. It blew me away the first time I watched it, and I haven't stopped thinking about it ever since. If you haven't seen this, I know I just spoiled a lot of it for you, but please go watch that right after you watch this video. I promise, even though I've spoiled it, it's still amazing. But yeah, this video is already a lot longer than I was planning, and I'm worried that I lost a lot of you guys when I put Hill House at number 4. But I just wanted to gush about these shows because they mean so much to me, and I think that literally everybody should watch all of them. Mike Flanagan is a genius, and I'm so glad that it seems like he's getting his flowers now. They are well-deserved. He was recently put in charge of making a new Exorcist movie after the absolute dumpster fire that was Exorcist Believer, and I think he'll do a great job with it. He was the person that was brought in to make the prequel to that awful Ouija movie that came out like 10 years ago, and his prequel is legitimately amazing. He was given like the most terrible source material in first movie, and he turned it into pure gold. Seriously, watch Ouija Origin of Evil if you haven't yet. It's really fun, and it's just a great horror movie that's not too intense. Also, sorry if my top 5 list of Flanagan shows looks way different than yours. When I put up the commentary post about which show was like the favorite amongst you guys, most of you said Hill House, and I was kind of worried to put it at number 4, but just know that I really, really love that show. It's just, I like the other 3 just a tiny bit more. I don't want the takeaway of this video to be that Davis Morgan hates The Haunting of Hill House, because I love, love, love that show. It's literally like I think it's like, for me, it's like Midnight Club is like 8 out of 10. Solid show, okay? Much better than average. Okay, then we get Haunting of Hill House, Haunting of Bly Manor, and Follow the House to Usher are like 9, 9.1, 9.2 probably, and then Midnight Mass just perfect 10. Something had to be a little bit lower than the other ones, and it was just Hill House for me. But I do love that show, so please don't think I hate it, especially if you love it. I know a lot of people love it, and I also think it's brilliant. But enough of me trying to save face by gushing about Hill House. You guys can roast me in the comments if you want. Remember to please subscribe to the channel if you haven't yet. I talk about horror literature and creepypasta and all sorts of spooky stuff, so if that's your thing, then your support would mean the world to me. I'm trying to hit 10,000 subs by the end of April, and it's looking to be kind of a pretty tough goal, but I think we can do it. If you want to support me further, you can become a channel member where you get access to exclusive videos and then early access to all my videos, and you will get a shout out at the end of all my videos as well. A massive thank you to all my channel members whose names you're seeing on the screen right now, and an extra special thank you to all my gold tier members: Amanda Mapes, Sadish John, Lucas Fernando, Chris Lamb, Silent Trails, Blue Radio Media, and Ezra. Your support really does mean so much to me. I know I talk about this every time, but like, thank you guys so much for supporting what I do here. It's amazing, and I'm super glad for you guys. But anyway, that's going to do it for this video. Thank you so much for listening to me rant about a bunch of shows that I really love and I dearly miss. I wish he would make more Netflix shows, but I understand why he doesn't. But anyway, I'll catch you in the next one. See ya.